It was a quiet summer night in Britain, August 8th, 1963. The kind of night when the countryside sleeps under a blanket of silence. But that night, silence was about to be broken by one of the most audacious crimes in British history. A crime so daring, so perfectly planned, it would shock the nation, rewrite security laws, and turn a group of ordinary criminals into living legends and fugitives forever. They called it the Great Train Robbery. You're watching Behind the Crime, where we uncover the world's most daring, shocking, and unforgettable real-life heists, and the minds that made them possible. Now, let's go back to the night it all began. The Royal Mail train was making its regular overnight run from Glasgow to London, carrying millions of pounds in cash. Inside the high-value mail carriage, 128 bags stuffed with banknotes were sealed tight, guarded only by postal workers. No police, no security detail. Just the hum of the train cutting through the darkness. 15 men, led by Bruce Reynolds, were waiting in the shadows near a small crossing in Buckinghamshire. They weren't the usual armed robbers. They were methodical, calm, and organized with military precision. Their plan was flawless, and their information came from an inside source known only as the Ulsterman. This insider had revealed everything: the schedule, the money route, the exact carriage carrying the cash. And with that, Bruce Reynolds crafted the perfect plan: to stop the train without raising suspicion and to take everything on board. At 3 a.m., under a moonless sky, one of the gang members climbed up the signal post and switched the light from green to red. When the train driver, Jack Mills, saw it, he did exactly what any professional would do. He stopped. And that's when the quiet night exploded into chaos. The robbers swarmed the locomotive. Second man, David Whitby, jumped out to call the signalman, but the phone lines had already been cut. Before he could react, he was grabbed, gagged, and dragged away. Jack Mills resisted, but was struck on the head with an iron bar, collapsing to the floor. The blow would haunt him for the rest of his life. The gang had planned to move the train another half-mile to a secluded bridge, Bridego Bridge, where the real heist would take place. But their hired driver, meant to operate the new diesel engine, suddenly froze. He couldn't drive it. In the middle of the confusion, a dazed and bleeding Jack Mills was forced to start the train himself. Moments later, at the bridge, the robbers got to work. One by one, they broke into the high-value carriage. The postal workers tried to resist. Men like Frank Dewhurst and Thomas Kett fought back, but they were quickly overpowered. In just 15 minutes, the robbers formed a human chain, unloading 120 of the 128 mailbags stuffed with cash. 2.61 million pounds, the equivalent of 62 million pounds today, vanished into the night, and not a single gun had been fired. They loaded the bags into 2 Land Rovers and a truck, vanishing into the darkness. By the time police arrived, all that remained were torn mail sacks, bloodstains, and silence. The robbers drove straight to their hideout, Leatherslade Farm, deep in the countryside. There, they celebrated. They played Monopoly using real stolen cash, ate breakfast, and laughed, believing they had just pulled off the perfect crime. But perfection never lasts. Police soon found the farm. Inside were fingerprints, food wrappers, and that infamous Monopoly board. All evidence left behind. The criminals who had planned every detail forgot the simplest rule: wipe your prints. Detective Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler was put in charge of a special train robbery squad. Within days, the investigation became the biggest manhunt in British history. One by one, the gang members began to fall. Roger Corddry, Brian Field, Charlie Wilson, Buster Edwards, Ronnie Biggs, and others, all captured through careful tracing of money trails, informants, and forensic clues. Brian Field's role was especially shocking. A solicitor's clerk, the man who helped them buy the hideout, caught by his own paperwork. By the end of the year, almost everyone connected to the robbery was behind bars. January 20th, 1964. The trial began at Aylesbury Assizes. It was one of the longest and most expensive in British history. Over 240 witnesses, 613 pieces of evidence, and the eyes of the nation watching every move. The verdict shocked everyone. Most of the robbers received sentences of 30 years, harsher than many murderers of the time. The judge called it a crime of sordid violence. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. It was just beginning. 1 year later, Charlie Wilson escaped from prison in a daring operation pulled off by 3 accomplices. 2 weeks later, he was in Paris getting plastic surgery. By 1965, he had joined Bruce Reynolds and Buster Edwards in Mexico, living off the stolen fortune. Months after that, Ronnie Biggs made his own escape from Wandsworth Prison. Using a ladder, a furniture van, and perfect timing, he fled to France, then to Brazil, where he became one of the world's most famous fugitives. For years, newspapers and tabloids were obsessed with their stories. They weren't just criminals anymore. They were folk legends. But the price of fame is always paid eventually. Time caught up with them all. Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, was captured in 1968 and served 10 years. He spent the rest of his life haunted by what he'd created, a crime that became bigger than him. He died peacefully in 2013. Ronnie Biggs lived out his days in Brazil, too frail to move, before returning to Britain voluntarily in 2001. He was released in 2009 and died 4 years later. Charlie Wilson, who once lived like a king in Spain, was shot dead in Marbella in 1990, a suspected drug feud. Buster Edwards, the flower seller who became a film character in Buster, ended his life in 1994. Others faded quietly. Roger Corddry, the signal expert, went back to being a florist. Douglas Goody lived out his final years in Spain, running a bar and telling stories of the good old days. Tommy Wisby and Jim Hussey, once part of the notorious gang, returned to crime in the 1980s and were caught for cocaine trafficking. By 2023, only Bob Welch remained alive, the last living link to that night. But the tragedy wasn't only theirs. Jack Mills, the train driver who was attacked, never fully recovered. He suffered chronic headaches for years before dying in 1970. His colleague David Whitby, traumatized by the ordeal, died of a heart attack at just 34. For them, the Great Train Robbery was no legend. It was a lifelong wound. In the end, much of the stolen money was never found. Rumors said it was hidden, laundered, or lost to bad investments. Some say a few robbers lived quietly off it for decades. But the truth, like the missing cash, was buried long ago. The Great Train Robbery remains one of Britain's most infamous crimes. A daring plan that combined intelligence, luck, and greed, and left behind a trail of broken lives. It proved one thing: You can plan the perfect crime. You can escape the walls of a prison, but you can never escape the weight of what you've done. This is Behind the Crime, where every legend has a price and every perfect plan eventually derails.